The world is ripping at the seams. A war is underway.
Not only for our time, but for a century.
A war fought in shadows. Some laughed. Others wept. It's not about territory, not about resources. It's about our future.
Ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
And in the heat of this battle, we may not even realize that this future is fading by our own hands. 1953, New York, Brooklyn. A newspaper delivery boy enters a building to sell them. The buyers only had dollar bills, no change. So the boy went up the stairwell to find change. Neighbors broke the dollar for him. The boy exits the building to count his earnings and discovers that something seems off with one coin. It seems lighter than the others. He tosses the coin in his hand several times and accidentally drops it. As it strikes the ground, the coin splits open. Inside the hollow coin lay a strip of film and a slip of paper with numbers. The boy picked up the strange find, not fully understanding what he held in his hand. At that moment, the ordinary newspaper boy held an encrypted, highly secret piece of information about the United States nuclear project. Knowledge about the very atomic bomb from Oppenheimer. The bomb that the greatest minds and major world powers are striving to create. The boy nonchalantly went to show the coin to a friend. She, in turn, showed it to her father, who luckily worked for the New York police. Thus, the coin quickly reached the FBI. There they quickly realized what it was. The coin was a piece of spy equipment used for passing information between contacts. But they had no idea what information it contained inside. The FBI's top agents got involved, but the code remained unsolved. The only thing they understood was this: Soviet spies used such a code, which meant that right in New York, under their noses, operated an espionage network. This coin belonged to a legendary KGB agent, Soviet spy number 1, the man who became a symbol of Soviet espionage in America during the Cold War. The American press wrote that such an enemy could not be disrespected. He would reveal his face to New York, but only after 4 years. Special Reserve. These were the illegal agents working abroad, agents who could operate undercover for decades, waiting for the first task. And special care was taken to create their legends, imagined past, or rather not entirely imagined. KGB officers would go to cemeteries and select the graves of people who died young, and their lives continued. But now, these lives were lived by special service employees. An agent did not simply pretend to be someone else, he became that person. Training lasted years, and spies mastered the enemy's language to perfection. Yet often, they were still discovered. Agents were often betrayed by the smallest details. During World War II, Soviet intelligence officers identified German spies using just one word: the word road. The problem was that Germans simply could not pronounce this word correctly. There was always an emphasis. Even their spies got caught on this.
Меня попросили сказать несколько слов перед этой картиной. Я выступаю в роль необычной для меня, потому что люди моей профессии привыкли больше слушать и меньше говорить.
The year 1957, Moscow at the Problem Center, an unreliable staff member in New York. This is a contact agent, codenamed Vic. He was just appointed and his performance is terrible. Constant mistakes at work. He started beating his wife. And recently he lost a coin with secret information inside. A decision is made in Moscow. The agent needs to be recalled before he compromises the entire network. May of the year 1957. He is summoned to Moscow. The management informs him of a promotion and supposedly an award ceremony. But Vic realizes he is simply being recalled, and he will never leave the Soviet Union again. He decides on an action. Reino Hayene. He is Vic, a Soviet operative, a man who spent his entire life working within the NKVD. a staff member with a highly questionable reputation, a reveler, a lover of parties and strong drinks. Initially, he was not supposed to hold this position at all. His predecessor perished. The ship he was on sank en route to the USA, and so they appointed Hayanen. He returns to the Soviet Union and makes a stopover in Paris. There he flees and heads to the US Embassy. Hayanen tells the Americans his identity. He claims he is a KGB agent and a radio operator. He wants to secure safety and stay in the United States. In exchange, he offers valuable information. At first, they don't believe him. To the Americans, he appeared as a plump, mustached stranger. Then, Reino Hayanen gives away highly classified information about his supervisor, an agent whose real name he did not even know. He only knew the code name, Colonel Mark. Reino indicates to the FBI agents the safe house where Colonel Mark transfers codes. The FBI establishes surveillance. They set up a base in an apartment across the street. At first, the FBI agents are disappointed. Nothing. Silence. Only 3 weeks later, lights suddenly flicker on in the apartment, just for a couple of seconds, but it was enough to apprehend Colonel Mark. The FBI continues surveillance and finally identifies who he is. Colonel Mark is Emil Goldfuss, an artist who rents a studio in the group. Finally, the FBI decides to conduct an arrest. Listen more and speak less. House number 252 on Fulton Street, Brooklyn. FBI agents storm the studio on the top floor. Before them stands a man about 50 years old. Tall, stooped, thin, a serious and calm demeanor. "We know who you are, Colonel Mark. You are under arrest." Silence in response. The FBI searches the contents of the studio and discovers a lot. Radio electronic equipment, codes, hollow nails, hollow cufflinks or earrings, a whole spy kit. Then Colonel Mark asks the FBI agent to hand him a pencil and paper from the table. The agents thought he was going to write important information or possibly a confession. But the colonel begins carefully filling in columns of numbers. He silently hands this sheet over to the agents, and then in turn, they send it for decryption. All the newspapers write about one thing. In the very heart of the USA, in New York, the top spy of the Soviet has been caught. Journalists record interviews with neighbors who could never have imagined that the man from the top floor was a KGB agent.
I thought he was an artist. He dressed like an artist.
If he walked into my shop, he'd sit down and talk to me about electronics.
During interrogations, Colonel Mark remains silent. He behaves calmly and confidently. And then, after 2 days, Colonel Mark, also known as Emil Goldfuss, reveals his real name. He is Rudolph Abel.
1957, the tenant of that studio was charged with being a colonel in Soviet intelligence.
The news immediately spread across the USA. The Americans couldn't learn anything from him other than his name. But they already realized that this was not just an agent before them. The United States Attorney declared that Rudolph Abel was the most important Soviet spy ever caught in the USA. His capture was a true victory for CIA and FBI. But who was he? Rudolph Abel, a native of Riga, born in the year 1903, the son of a chimney sweep. He spoke 6 languages. He joined the Komsomol, served in the army, and from there entered intelligence. He was a KGB agent and died in 1955. The Americans didn't even realize that by telling journalists the spy's name, they themselves conveyed an agent's message to Moscow. His name was not Rudolph Abel. Rudolph Abel was his close friend from the KGB, who had indeed died 2 years earlier from a heart attack. The spy used his name so that Moscow would understand who had really been detained. And in Moscow, the signal was received. Now they knew who had indeed been caught. Colonel Mark. He is also Emil Goldfuss. He is also Rudolph Abel. He is also William Fischer. During the Cold War, the world's best scientists were enlisted to develop various spy devices, kisses of death, lipstick, pistols. They looked like ordinary tubes of lipstick, but inside contained a single loaded bullet. Pistols were placed in umbrellas. Cameras were tucked almost anywhere. A pack of cigarettes, a belt, a button, a wristwatch, rings. At the CIA, cameras were attached to pigeons. Birds were intended for aerial photography of secret facilities. Specially designed cameras weighed 35 grams. Yet the birds weren't even trained. It was assumed they could find their way home from any point on the planet. For testing, about 100 birds were sent flying over the upper parts of the USA. and the photos came out clear, it's known that in the year 1976, pigeons were planned to be released over the upper parts of St. Petersburg. However, whether or not it happened remains classified to this day. And such a tube with lockpicks was transported by agents directly in the rectum. The methods used by intelligence services to listen to each other are astounding. In the 1990s, the CIA developed Charlie. Here it is. It's a catfish. It was created for collecting underwater signals from enemy ships. It was controlled by remote control, the microphone was located in the body and the propulsion system in the tail. This is the eavesdropping system Buran. It read glass vibrations in a room using an infrared beam. Unbelievable. Then they deciphered the sounds, and as a result, the words. Another fascinating story. For the 20th anniversary of the Arctic Pioneer Camp, the American ambassador was presented with a coat of arms. The joke was indeed told to hang it in their office, and the Americans did just that. They hung it in the office right at the US Embassy in Moscow. And only after 7 years were the listening devices discovered there. For 7 years, intelligence agents eavesdropped on the Americans' conversations. In the 1970s, a spy stump was found near Moscow. The device was disguised as an ordinary tree stump, but it turned out that it intercepted signals from the Soviet missile system and transmitted data via satellite to the USA. There was also a system of disguising signaling beacons as dog droppings. An agent would walk his dog and scatter dog droppings nearby. Later, aircraft would use these beacons to guide their weapons. Therefore, let's clean up after our dogs in the yard. Let's live in cleanliness. And, as it turns out, in safety. Rudolph Abel, also known as William Fischer. Well, here we have arrived at his real name. Who exactly is he? William Fischer was born on the 11th of July in the year 1903 in the small English town of Newcastle upon Tyne. His father, an emigrant from Russia, was an ethnic German named Heinrich Fischer. He named his son after his favourite poet, William Shakespeare. His mother was Lyudmila Korneyeva. William Fischer was a man of 3 identities: Russian, Englishman and German. He was skilled at drawing, playing the piano and guitar. At 16, he was admitted to one of the universities in London. At 22 years old, without finishing the institute, he joined the Red Army. He served in a radio telegraphy regiment and quickly mastered the skills of a radio operator. He became the best among his comrades. Fischer's talent was evident. He was the best radio operator and also knew 4 languages, a real asset for the KGB. He was then invited to work in intelligence. Under the pseudonym Frank, he worked as a communications officer until 1937. Thanks to William, all the information gathered by the legendary Cambridge 5 was sent to the centre. I won't tell you about the Cambridge 5 right now. If you're interested, we can start a segment, a spy segment where I'll recount individual stories. But now on to William Fischer. In 1948, William was assigned a new mission. Receiving the pseudonym Mark, he went to the United States. Fischer crossed the border disguised as a Lithuanian refugee named Andrew Coyotis. He had a slight Baltic accent, or at least it seemed so. Now he's the artist Emil Goldfuss. American counterintelligence officers had no idea that from a small studio in Brooklyn, information of utmost importance was being sent to the USSR. Data on the economy, the movement of military equipment, defense industry, and most crucially, information about the United States atomic project. William created 2 strong intelligence networks operating not only in the USA and Mexico, but also in Brazil and Argentina. His spies were everywhere, even in Los Alamos itself, in that very military town where Oppenheimer created his nuclear bomb. Someone with the code name Perseus worked there. Only decades later was it revealed who was leaking information to Fischer. It was Ted Hall, a young talented genius involved in weapons development. He did not take money for leaking information. Fischer personally convinced him. Later, Hall mentioned that passing information to the Soviets might have prevented the use of an American bomb in China. Fischer developed an entire system of dead drops from which he inconspicuously retrieved codes left by agents. Fischer also coordinated the activities of sabotage groups located in the United States in case of war between the USSR and the USA. Under William's command, saboteurs were to strike strategic targets. There is a restaurant in Washington called Occidental, a pleasant small establishment, and what happened there once saved all of humanity. On October 26, 1962, Americans positioned their military ships around Cuba. They were preparing to stop Soviet ships carrying another batch of nuclear missiles. The Americans were ready to launch a first strike. The Soviet Union was also not planning to stop its ships. Troops were kept in full combat readiness. A third world war could begin at any moment. And then personally to Kennedy comes the information the Soviet Union is ready for negotiations, but there were no official statements. The information was passed by ABC journalist John Scarley, who was contacted, as the media would later report, by the mysterious Mr. X. A few hours later, the American side sent back conditions for resolving the Caribbean conflict to Mr. X. If the Soviet Union removed its missile installations from Cuba, the USA promised to lift the blockade and pledged not to conduct any military or other hostile actions against Cuba. Now a signal is sent to Moscow. The American side is ready for negotiations and proposes a plan for resolution. Where did this signal come from? Official figures did not get in contact. The signal was sent by Soviet intelligence agent Alexander Feklisov. October 26, 1962, the most tense moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The countdown was not in hours, but in minutes. And at this very moment, at the Occidental restaurant, 2 blocks from the White House, 2 people meet. ABC journalist John Scarley, who was in friendly relations with members of the Kennedy clan, and Alexander Fomin, who knew this perfectly well. He was an employee of the Soviet embassy, and Fomin was not his real name. His real name was Feklisov, and he was a KGB agent. He was not authorized to negotiate on his personal initiative. Why will this war start, Alexander? Because of mutual fear, John. Cuba fears an American invasion and the USA fears missile attacks from Cuba. According to Scarley, Feklisov then proposed a solution. Perhaps there is a way out. What do you think of the proposal where we promise to remove our missiles under the supervision of the United Nations? Scarley replied that he did not know, but would try to find out. After these words, they ate in complete silence. Later, Scarley recalled that Feklisov was so deep in thought that he accidentally took Scully's crab cakes. In turn, Scully ended up with the pork chop that Feklisov had ordered. The international situation was tense, and he decided not to draw attention to it. He let go of the response from Kennedy. The spy went to the ambassador, but the ambassador refused to send these reports to Moscow, claiming that the embassy was not authorized to conduct such serious negotiations. At his own risk, Alexander sent the cipher to Moscow himself. It quickly reached Nikita Khrushchev. And only then did serious negotiations begin between the leaders of the 2 countries. The negotiations continued for several days. They met several more times, and finally an agreement was reached marking the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thus, Soviet spies and an American journalist essentially saved the world from a nuclear apocalypse. They reached an agreement when politicians could not. In the Occidental restaurant, a commemorative plaque still hangs over that particular table. At this place, during the tense period of the Cuban crisis, a mysterious Russian Mr. X handed a proposal to withdraw missiles from Cuba to ABC correspondent John Scully. This meeting served to eliminate the threat of nuclear war. In the year 1957, Fischer began to notice that the behavior of the radio operator Heinonen was becoming suspicious. He constantly telegraphed to the center that Heinonen needed to be recalled before he could compromise the entire agent network. Then the radio operator disappeared. Fischer knew this was not coincidental and guessed that he would soon be apprehended. He went to his safe house to destroy all evidence. Without turning on the light, he found all the hiding spots, but something else gave him away. In this apartment, he kept a small case with microfilm, and the film contained letters from his wife. He had not destroyed them earlier because, while working undercover, he dreamed of returning to his family. Fischer carefully took out the case and suddenly dropped it. In the dark room, he began to search the floor for the case, but was unsuccessful. Leaving the letters on the floor like that was out of the question, so he decided to turn on the light. Just for a couple of seconds, but it was enough for the Americans to detect him. When they burst into his room in the morning, he asked for a pencil and a sheet of paper. Fischer began writing numbers in neat columns. When the FBI agent deciphered the codes, they realized it was just a mathematical puzzle. It contained no information. Then why did Fischer write it? While writing, he supposedly broke the pencil and discreetly extracted microfilm from it. It was yet another spy cache. Then he flushed the microfilm down the toilet. In this way, he destroyed the secret radiogram right in front of the American counterintelligence agents. Everything Abel did, he did out of conviction, not for money. "I would like us to have 3 or 4 people like Abel in Moscow," said former CIA head Alan Dulles. The trial that captured the attention of all Americans had begun. They were eager to finally see the face of the enemy they had been so frightened of, and that face was calm and silent. The prosecution insisted on the death penalty. Rudolph Abel, or William Fischer's attorney, became James Donovan. But why him? Donovan was a man of principle. "We are a free country, and anyone, even if he came here with the intent to destroy us, should be provided with the best possible attorney." Donovan himself was a former intelligence officer. He fully understood the entire context, and he also understood that he and all his friends could at any moment find themselves in William Fischer's place. The attorney built several key elements for the prosecution. First, he focused on Heikkinen. Here's a short newspaper excerpt describing Heikkinen's appearance in court. "Last week, a fat, mustachioed 37-year-old man squeezed his large body into the witness chair and slowly looked over the faces of those sitting before him. Reino Heikkinen, testifying for the prosecution, told the court that he had come to the United States 5 years ago as a Soviet spy. Heikkinen pointed at the man with the blank, bird-like face sitting in the defendant's seat. Rudolph Ivanovich Abel, 55 years old, of modest artistic talents, was arrested by the FBI last summer and is charged with having manipulated the image using his attorney. The behavior of the defendant in court also strongly influenced the jury. He conducted himself calmly, amicably, and even often smiled. He showed emotion in the courtroom only once. When letters to his wife were being read in court, he cried, and this also worked in his favor. The image of a calm intelligence officer who loves his wife answered a crucial question. Abel's demeanor, portraying him as someone who loves his family, played into the agent's favor. Additionally, the attorney argued that William Fischer could be useful for the United States. Later, he could be exchanged for American intelligence officers who might be detained in the Soviet Union. The judge found the defense's arguments reasonable and sentenced Fischer to 32 years in prison. This was a victory for the attorney. There would be no death penalty. In the Atlanta prison, Fischer was placed in a cell with mafia members hoping to break him later. But even there, Fischer managed well. For someone of his appearance, thin, stooped, tall, prison life was not easy. Yet he earned respect from everyone, both criminals and staff. Sometimes he even helped inmates write appeals for amnesty. In prison, he was simply called the Colonel. As described once, he even mediated between mafia godfathers. In his presence, they made peace. "I feel good. I am engaged in mathematics and painting. Music is excluded here, but maybe later I can engage in it again," he wrote in a letter to his wife. And this drawing he created right in prison, depicting the cell where he was held. The year 1960, Brussels. At an international automobile exhibition, an innovative invention is presented, a car alarm with a lock system. By the conclusion of the exhibition, it receives the main Golden Medal. And the name of Gordon Lonsdale, a talented British businessman of Canadian origin, echoes throughout Europe. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of England bestowed upon Gordon the title of Sir. At the time, she was unaware that Lonsdale was a Soviet intelligence officer, a spy, whose real name was Conan Molody. In the conditions of the Cold War, the USSR urgently needed illegal agents in England. Having received the alias Ben, Molody was to head to England via Canada. He was called Gordon Lonsdale. The choice of name was not accidental. Such a person did indeed exist, but died in the year 1943 under unexplained circumstances. Once in Canada, Conan very quickly adapted to the role of a calculating young man concerned only with money. Upon arriving in England, he decided to go into business. Not so much for profit, but to justify his continued stay in the country. Soon he became the owner of several jukeboxes. In the initial phase, the business incurred heavy losses, which were covered by KGB funds. Soon Conan took a position as one of the directors of the very company where he purchased the machines. He did not forget about his espionage work either. 17,000 sheets of classified documents were handed over by him to Moscow. Among them were data on anti-submarine defense, cryptography, acoustic systems, port defense, the technical condition of the British fleet, and even bacteriological weapons. In the year 1959, one of the employees asked him to evaluate his father's invention, a car alarm with a locking mechanism. Conan liked the idea, found a sponsor, and set up production. At the exhibition in Brussels, he presented the invention and immediately received the main award. After that, the business in alarm production quickly took off. Queen Elizabeth was so impressed by the invention that she bestowed the title of Sir on the Soviet intelligence officer. Imagine how deeply the espionage network worked and how far the spies penetrated. Conan, however, was eventually unmasked and captured. He refused to testify because he understood that imprisonment was inevitable. And he considered his main goal then to find out as much as possible about the inner workings of British intelligence, which was bound to reveal itself during the court hearings. I believed then and believe now, an intelligence officer must remain one even on the defendant's bench, and in the courtroom he must continue to operate. It was necessary to create situations where the British counterintelligence would show what it truly knew and what it did not know at all. This was largely successful. He was sentenced to 25 years but served only 3. In April 1964, he was exchanged for a British spy. The year 1960 at the border, Ural. Air Defense detected an aircraft, the command orders to bring it down. It was the American reconnaissance plane U-2. Pilot Gary Powers manages to eject. He's detained. These are excellent news for William Fischer. Negotiations for an exchange are beginning. An American pilot for a Soviet spy. Initially, they wanted to exchange 1 for 1, but the Americans started bargaining, realizing Fischer's value. They demanded 2 more Americans and Soviet miners. Khrushchev himself personally ordered Fischer's exchange for 3 Americans. Berlin, the bridge over the river Havel. It was here that the exchange took place. Later, this bridge would be named the Bridge of Spies, and it would be used for other exchanges in the future. William Fischer was released. When he was met in Moscow, right at the airplane's ramp, a dialogue occurred. "So, Rudolph Ivanovich, you have arrived?" "What do you mean, Rudolph Ivanovich?" "Now you will be Rudolph Ivanovich for the rest of your life." He was forbidden from using his real name, Rudolph Abel. William Fischer continued to work in intelligence. He taught and trained a new generation of spies. Fischer's main achievement, the American intelligence services never understood what Fischer was doing in the United States. He did not betray anything. The entire network of agents continued its work. Incidentally, the life of Finn Heinonen ended tragically. In the year 1964, he died in an accident. His sedan collided with a huge truck. According to rumors, that's how the KGB's eliminators dealt with a traitor. 11 years after his arrest, the film The Dead Season was released in the Soviet Union, a film about intelligence officers. The real event was Fischer's appearance in the film's introduction.
Меня попросили сказать несколько слов перед этой картиной.
An interesting fact. At the time, you couldn't appear bald on television. Yes, that's how it was. There were strict standards regarding the appearance of announcers, presenters, actors, and he, Fischer, had to have hair glued to his head. They managed to record only from the 8th take, also amusing. The top Soviet spy, who changed the course of the Cold War, couldn't record from the 1st take. The intelligence officer died of lung cancer at 68 years old. It is said that even in an unconscious state he spoke English. His daughter said she would not attend the funeral if the false name was on the tombstone. So it was decided to bury him under both surnames, Abel Fischer.